Hi there, and welcome to the first video in my series of how to use MySQL as well as Python and Pandas to do data analytics. And the first lesson that I want to go through is just how to read the documentation and find information of how to use these technologies. A lot of times when you're using this technology, you're going to get stuck and you're going to need help. And it's always tempting just to go into Google and to type in a question. And usually you're going to get some pretty good resources on Stack Overflow. You might find some good YouTube tutorials. You might come across some other websites, but I'd argue it's in your best interest to always go to the documentation of any kind of library you're using, and that's because it's going to cover all the functionality that's available to you, and it's always a great idea just to kind of familiarize yourself with the technology. If you join a new team or you're joining a company, it's also a great way to get yourself up to speed so that you can be as productive as possible, as fast as possible. No one really likes that person who is constantly asking questions to their teammates. It kind of makes you look a little helpless. So taking some initiative to familiarize yourself with the technology and taking some time to read the documentation is just a great way to take initiative and show that you're being proactive and learning as much as possible. So if we go to Google, just type in Python Pandas, and that'll bring you to the should bring you to this link here, which is the Python Data Analysis Library. So when you click on that link, we're going to go up to the documentation here. And you can see from the table of contents that this documentation has a lot of information for you. Not all libraries that you use are going to have good documentation, but because Pandas is a pretty big library and a lot of people use it, it's got a fairly large community. And what makes this documentation so great is that it has a lot of reference material. It has tutorials and how-to guides, as well as cookbooks for sample code that you can use. So this series is going to look at how to use SQL with Pandas, and the reason why I'm doing that is I haven't seen too many good tutorials that go through of how to use SQL and Pandas. So what we're going to do is go down to the IO tools, which stands for input output, and you can see from here that Pandas has a lot of options to handle different kind of format types. So a lot of times when you're doing data analytics, you might be given information in a CSV file, could be in a Microsoft Excel file. Perhaps you're being asked to scrape a website and you need to use the HTML functionality. Pandas, as well as Python, just has a lot of tools available to you to handle a lot of different situations. Now, because I want to look at how to use a MySQL database, we're going to go down here to the Read SQL, and that's going to bring us to this part of the documentation. And it kind of quickly summarizes how to use SQL queries. But the point I want to make is that it has these key functions, and that is read SQL table, read SQL query, read SQL, as well as the data frame to SQL. The two main functions you're really going to use, though, are the first two, and that's just the read SQL table and query. It's pretty obvious what they do. You know, this read SQL table is just going to read a table that you tell it to from a database, and the other one is just going to read a SQL query that you write. So it could be, as simple as a select statement. The third function, though, I want to point out, basically just does what the other two do, but I would stay away from using that function. It's always in your best interest when you're working on a team to make your code as explicit as possible, and you can see that the first two functions are very explicit in what they do. I mean, if you read SQL table, you use that function, it's really clear that you're pulling a table out of a database, right? So the reason why you want to be explicit with your code is that if another teammate needs to read your code or take over your project, it's always good to be as explicit as possible so that they can know, so it's very clear what you're doing. So let's take a quick look here at the read SQL query, and you can see from the documentation that it shows you how to use this method as well as all the arguments that it takes. So you can see that it takes a SQL string that you write, which is just a Python string, it could be a select statement. It also takes a connection object, which just connects you up to the database that you're using. So you can see from the documentation it has a lot of information, and it's really important that you read through this and you skim through maybe some tutorials as well as some other parts of the table of contents. And just to familiarize yourself, just know what's available to you, the tools that you have, and perhaps how to use some of the functionality. So I'm going to suggest spending about an hour kind of just reading through this and just become familiar with this technology. It's a really great skill to have, and it's really good to be able to teach yourself things, right? So spend some time doing that, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.